We're still in unblending / befriending. Befriending is one of the F's. Just think more about the F than the B. So if the feeling towards the part is negative, such as frustration, distrust, or dislike, empathize with why this part may judge the target part. Of course, it makes sense why you may not like these uncomfortable feelings, or let it know you understand its need for, and then name the need: safety, control, calmness. Those are real common ones. Usually that will do the trick. If you got, let's say, the sad part, how do you feel towards the sadness? I wish I wouldn't feel this way. Okay, does it make sense why this other part of you might want you to feel better? Well, sure. Okay, great. Just let it know you get it. And usually just doing that is enough to have that part relax a bit. It's enough befriending, it's enough empathy and understanding. And then you could follow up with this. Would this part be willing to relax, step back, and let you see if you can help the sad part, the exiled sad part? This is a pretty key piece. Letting it know, the way Dick, I remember Dick speaking to this, is he would say, would you be open to letting us help the sadness if it was possible to help it feel better? And then he would reassure the part, it's not so that we can give this part more power. I don't say that much anymore, but sometimes I do weave it in. So yeah, just something you could throw out there if it feels apropos. And then if that isn't enough, or you feel it start to peter out, you can always check around the trust. Does this part feel like it can trust you? And if the answer is no, you can simply ask, what does it need so it can trust you more? And it'll almost always say something that you can do right there in the moment. So this is getting into unblending protector parts, and sometimes you'll have more than one show up. So let's say you do this. How do you feel towards the sadness? I wish we didn't feel that way. Okay, can you let it know that you get that? Of course, you want to feel better. And if it was possible to help this part, not give it more power, but just help it, would this part be willing to step back? Okay, fine. I don't totally trust that, but I'll give you a chance. Okay, wonderful. The part steps back. And then you ask again, and I think we're getting into this here. How do you feel towards the part now? How do you feel towards the sadness now? If you get a yes, if you get a yes to the part unblending, or even if you just get a sense that it relaxed a bit, you can go back to the very powerful question, how do you feel towards the part now? Now, ideally, arguably, but really there's no wrong response people can give. You actually want to know if there's another part baked in there, and that they're relating to the sadness / exile from another part. So it's not ideally necessarily. What's ideal is being very aware of what is going on for the client. And eventually, we want to get to a point where when you ask this question again, how do you feel towards the part now? There's a self-led quality relationship to it. There's a self to parts relating. Oftentimes, it mostly, in my experience, goes to compassion. You don't need to have any agenda around this. Compassion is very common. Sometimes curiosity is where they go. And that's one that Dick, at least he used to focus on a whole lot. And I think that's because if there is no compassion, usually you can at least generate some curiosity, some interest. And oftentimes, even if there's a lot of frustration, there is some curiosity somewhere in there. So I think that's an easier self-led quality to get to than compassion. And I have a slide that maybe I can present later around kind of the spectrum of self-led qualities. And the good news is that you don't even need curiosity. If people can simply get to neutral, that's good enough. How do you feel now towards the part? Neutral, or, not good, not bad. That's usually safe enough for the exile part to move forward. So if you think about it, I'm not going to go into the whole spectrum. I have it laid out with a lot more nuance, but at least think neutrality as a minimum, just a neutral relating. If not, or even better than that, could be some curiosity. And then as you work with the part and you find out more about it, it's very, very natural for it to shift into compassion. So all that said, let's say if another part, okay, I'm jumping ahead. I should just stick to the table. But I'll just finish this thought. So you've asked the part that wants the client to feel better to step back. It says yes. You ask, how do you feel towards the part now? And if it's not a self-led quality, then you just come back here. Okay, of course, it makes sense why this other part might feel a little impatient. It makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Sure, great. Let it know you get that. You have feelings too about how much time has been kind of lost, dealing with all this. And would it be willing to step back right now to let you try to help this part? Not give it more power, but just see if we can help it. Would it be open to that? Okay, fine, great. How do you feel towards the sadness now? Now I'm feeling a little interested in it. All that said, if this continues to work, let's say you just keep getting protector after protector after protector, it's okay. Just keep unblending. I always write down notes. It's good to keep track of all these. It's really helpful to come back to them later, almost always. But if it works to just do this little bit of empathy, they're willing to step back when you ask after that, then great. I think I mentioned this last time, but Dick very often just gets away with just asking parts to step back. And there's a time and a place for that. And as you gain more confidence and you just emanate, from an experience place, this is what would be good. Kind of like a structural family therapist that might direct the family to have the parents be the parents and the children be taken care of by the parents instead of the other way around. It's in the spirit of that. But if it's worked, just keep doing that until you get to the self-led quality. Now, all that said, as we go further into the table in this section of the table and below, close to this section, we're going to talk about other ways to help parts step back and relax and unblend. Okay, so how do you feel towards the part now? We'll keep going. All right, so now contracting. So I've just spoken this a little bit, and this is one of the main interventions before you get to exiles. So if it was possible to help the exile part feel better, would the protector then be open to relaxing or stepping back? If it says no, and I love this word, you can simply ask, what's the concern? What is it concerned / afraid would happen if it did step back? I've heard in some more recent demos, I've noticed that Dick uses the word afraid. It's a fine word to use. I like what's the concern better because it doesn't even imply a feeling of fear. It's just it's much more open-ended, and it just, to me, it feels very clean. So I'll ask, what is a concern? And then you're going to address, most often, this is really important and you want to have this memorized, but you're going to address two common concerns for protector parts. It's one, that these feelings will never go away, and it's two, that these feelings will be too much. It'll be more than we can handle. Sometimes there are these other ones, so I'll just read through them. So sometimes there's a concern that the therapist might judge the clients for the exiles or whatever feelings are there. The client's external environment may not be safe, so you have to then pivot and address that as best you can. And then there's more I want to say about that, so I'll come back to that. And then 5, that accessing the exiles, the pain, usually, it's some version of pain, will trigger the firefighters, will trigger an addictive response or a fight, flight, freeze response. I think that's all lumped into kind of the roles of the firefighters. And so then you would contract and have a conversation with the firefighters, which we're going to get into later. But these first 2 are the most important. These feelings will never go away, or these feelings will be too much. The never go away concern, in my experience, is pretty easily reassured. But what you want to remember about all of these concerns is that they tend to come from really young parts. So the logic is also young. And I'm not implying that kids don't have great ideas sometimes, oftentimes, but sometimes young logic is just, very obviously irrational. And so with this one, you can just simply talk a little bit about how feelings always pass. The feelings never last. And some of the training I've heard people say things like, even the most intense emotions, if people can just be with them, they only last for about 90 seconds. And if you think about that, like if you set a timer for 90 seconds, it usually doesn't even get close to that. It's usually like 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, sometimes 15, 20 seconds. It is a relatively short amount of time. Again, the key is how we're relating to the feelings. But for this one, for the feelings will never go away part, you kind of talk that out, have them do some reality testing. Is that true? Don't feelings come and go? And it's usually a quick yes. These feelings will be too much. 2 things here. I mean, at least I'm going to give you 2 pieces. One is, this is where I love the pause, allow, appreciate type of interventions, is for one, you can have them just notice in this moment, are the feelings too much? And you can come back to this at any time. Very similar to the awareness continuum intervention, or how do you feel towards this part? It's something you can always come back to. But just in this moment, is this more than you can handle, or can you hang in there with it? It is usually how I phrase it. And almost always, in any one particular moment, not always, but almost always, they are okay with it. And it just takes slowing down, becoming mindful of the present moment to realize that. And if that is the case, then take a moment and let the feeling know that it isn't more than they can handle. That's just a powerful intervention. So many of us, so often, we're told we're too much. So it could be a very reparative thing to hear, and especially it's usually emotion driven, that we're told our feelings are too much, and then the feelings get stuck. Really, the key with emotional processing, there's so much I can say about emotional processing, and for me, it's one of the main focal points, especially of the trauma work, nuances of psychotherapy. But the main key, I want to name several of these. One is, most of the suffering around emotions comes because we're pushing them down, comes because we're resisting them. In this language, in IFS language, comes because we're relating to it from a part who's trying to suppress it. And it's that struggle that creates a type of friction that then feels really, really badly. And I'll just tell you just a quick story. I had a client years ago who was working through they were, I won't go into detail, but just very significant assault traumas. And from different people, there were like 4 or 5 of them. And every time we tuned in to work with those parts, she could feel those parts floating outside of her body, just kind of in front of her and up, a little above and out. And so we worked with the first one, and as she was, befriending it, talking to it, unblending from protective parts so she could even access it, she could start to feel it coming closer and closer to her. And as it entered her body, she essentially had somewhat of a panic attack. As she processed the anxiety, she was able to just be with it. It eventually passed, and she felt some relief. And of course, we continued the work, and the same thing happened for the rest of them until we got to the last one. By the time we got to the last one, she had developed, this is my assessment, but she had developed such a trust and acceptance around these parts and what they were holding, that when the last one came in, and we were both surprised about this, but it came in, we were expecting panic attack, and she simply felt it as this cool energy moving through her body and kind of discharging. And I think that's just such a beautiful example of how when people get into the right states, these feelings, I'm not going to say they become pleasant, but they feel right. They feel okay. And obviously, eventually, there's a lot of relief that happens. These emotions have to be expressed. I like Gordon Neufeld. He's got a little piece around emotional processing. Emotions seek expression. These are his laws of emotions, that emotions seek expression, which essentially he's implying you can't get rid of them. They must be expressed. And then emotions seek consciousness, which is his way of naming that we want to understand these feelings. So being able to even just name a feeling as sadness, as anger, is a way to make it conscious. So express, conscious, and of course we could gather more meaning, like the memory it came from, why we felt that way. All of that's helpful. It's helpful to be able to understand and make meaning of our experiences. And then if it gets those two things, and then it finds equilibrium. Another piece, emotional processing, from Gordon Neufeld, which I think is so important, is he talks about how we don't evolve, we don't mature intellectually, we mature emotionally. And you can maybe think of some folks who maybe have been addicts for a long time, have avoided their feelings, and in terms of their emotional maturity is still pretty young. Gordon Neufeld would argue it's because they haven't been feeling their feelings. It's the emotions that change our character, that make us adapt. When we simply can't change the external environment, what happens is there's something we feel about that, and then we grow, adapt, evolve, and mature. And then the last piece I want to name around emotional processing, which it's one of the most brilliant things ever said about emotions. This is Dan Siegel. He talks about how emotions are a sign of integration. If your clients can just remember that one thing, it'll help them have right relationship with their emotions. And using an IFS lens, you can see that what's being integrated is literally a part of you. Feelings that have been exiled and a part that's returning, and becoming part of your whole self. Kind of a seeming paradox in IFS that we see over and over again is earlier in the work, people have such a negative relationship and perception of so many of their parts that they think are bad or evil or wrong. And then after they're done working with them, helping them unburden and heal, they recognize these are actually integral aspects and elements of who I am. So all emotion is a sign of integration. Okay, so that is my sidebar around emotional processing. Okay, so I probably get into it later, but I'm going to just name it now just to keep it in one place. These are the concerns of the protectors. I'm sure it's down here somewhere, the concerns for the exiles. Let me just name them now. If we get back to it again, it's fine. But the main concerns the exiles have are, the main two, going to be invalidated, and or this will be my only opportunity. Our clients can become really adept at keeping their emotions at bay, and these exiled parts, really all the parts, they can be very opportunistic and resourceful, and they can recognize, oh, we're in therapy now with that Naropa graduate therapist who's got that really soft voice and is letting, helping the protective parts relax a bit. Now's our chance. Let's go for it. And we talk about flooding, that clients can get flooded. Just to tie it into this whole resistance to emotions piece, what I've seen is that one of the main reasons why an exile part would even want to flood or feel like it needs to flood the client, in IFS we call it getting hijacked by an exile, is because there are parts trying to hold it back. So if that's happening or starting to happen, for me, it's a sign potentially that there's a protective part somewhere in the mix. So I might come back to the question. Well, I'm just curious, how are you feeling towards the sadness right now? And then you might identify a protective part. You do some befriending work with it, the 5Fs, and help it relax a bit. And then, surprise, surprise, the exile part is no longer trying to hijack or flood the client. And Dick says this too. I've seen it many times, and I'm pretty tolerant of that kind of hijacking. I err on the side of really trusting the client and the client's process. And as long as we can make it through the whole process, my experience is people aren't hurt by whatever their system ends up doing or wants to do. And as much as we can try to facilitate things to make it as graceful as possible. So sometimes these exiled parts have been so invalidated. They'll say it, especially, if you talk it out, they'll just say, you know what, I'm paraphrasing, but you know what, you're just going to have to let us do this. In order to fully get it, we need you to get it. It's been so repressed, or it's been so invalidated. You need to hang in there while we complete processing this in this way. And if the clients aren't up for that, you just keep working with the protector parts until they're willing and tolerating of it. And that's very, very rare. Usually the exile parts will agree. And here's the kicker. So you want to let the exile part know, that everything they feel is valid. It may not make a lot of sense in the present moment, but you're saying that, implying that based on the history of the part, the client, of course, these feelings are there for a reason. So you double down on that as much as you need. You communicate that as much as you need so that is clear. And then the other key related to that, this will be our only chance, is you create an attachment bridge, which is, we will come back as many times as we need. When you're dropping off your preschool child at preschool for the first time, you don't just drop them off and say, peace out. You let them know, daddy is going to be back in 2 hours, just doing a half day. You don't quite know what that means right now, but it could be worse. No, you don't say that. You say, I'm going to be back in 2 hours. In 2 hours, data will be back. That's an attachment bridge. And we do this all the time with friends. We'll see you later. I'll talk to you next week. It's a great practice with clients. I don't always do this, but just knowing when their next session is and being able to name it. So you're giving them an attachment bridge. It's the same thing with these parts. So you let the exile know, we will come back and process this as many times as necessary. We don't have to do it all right now. And does the part feel like it can trust that? Yes, it does. And so then the request is, if we come back as many times as we need to, if we promise to continue to validate whatever you show us, would you be willing to show the client just as much as the client can handle? That's the phrase. I'm sure we're going to get to that eventually, but I wanted to just go through the whole thing here while we're talking about the manager part. All right, so let's keep going. Contracting, re-rolling. I'm not a huge fan of doing this one this early, but people are talking about that more now, and I'm pretty sure it's like that in the workbook. But if I'm going to give this the benefit of the doubt, it potentially at least plants some seeds of motivation. If we could help heal this part, what role were you meant to do? What would you prefer to do? And if you give us the space to do that, we can then support you more fully in moving into that job. And you absolutely want to come to this towards the end, like after, this is closer down towards the end of the table. After the exile has been witnessed and retrieved and unburdened, and you come back to the protector parts. We'll talk about that more later. And you ask them, hey, now that things are better and this younger exiled part is feeling better, what were you meant to do? What would you prefer to do? And then it's a very graceful, usually, transition into that. Okay, so befriending, contracting, re-roll. What is this part afraid would happen if it didn't do its job? This you might ask if you are running into some resistance. Just empathizing with the part isn't working. Asking it to step back isn't quite working. And so then you might throw out there, okay, well, what is this part afraid would happen if it didn't do its job? Oftentimes that's related to something around the exile. So it kind of gives you a pivot point and a permission slip to start talking to the exile bit and address concerns like, could you show the client just as much as the client can handle? Or can you trust that we're going to be validating? And sometimes the concerns are something else or external. And firefighters, if we don't do our job and manage this, then this other part will come in and will potentially binge and purge to manage the feelings. So that gives you a pivot point to then talk to the firefighter part and contract around that. And we'll get to that later. Okay. Unblending / befriending. Can this protector part share when this role was necessary and potentially life-saving? This one is fantastic. I love this question. So this is about honoring the part. And so letting this part know, you know what, it makes a lot of sense why you had to become so critical growing up in that environment, or why you had to become so perfectionist, or why you had to kind of check out and numb out these feelings. Having that, they call it, in CBT, they call it an affect bridge. This isn't exactly an affect bridge. An affect bridge is, oh, it's a lot of sadness here. Can the sadness show you how far back that sadness goes? This is a type of bridge, but it's more around the role. When was this role necessary? And one of the powerful aspects of asking this question is that you then know or have some clarity around how young this protector part might be. And I'll share from ACT, Stephen Hayes. He's got a program called ACT in Action that is actually fantastic. And it overlaps so much with IFS. ACT is actually a parts model. And he's very big on affect bridges. He will often ask, how far back does this feeling go? Or when was the earliest time you remember feeling something along these lines? And the reason he does it is because he's got this one, it's one of my favorite quotes of his. We have more compassion for children than we do for who we see in the mirror. And that is so true and so brilliant. So, you'll apply it to exile parts, but apply it to the protector parts. How long ago, how far back did this part start this role? Oh, wow, since you were 12. Okay, interesting. How do you feel now toward this protector part when you can see how young it is? Oh, I feel, a lot of compassion towards it. Just if you can get the client to in a self-led relationship to any protector, that protector is going to be much more likely to collaborate and allow you to facilitate this particular healing process, if not others. Okay, so let's keep going. So here, next section, befriending, contracting, and the trust bridge. So we touched on this. When the work stalls out, it can be helpful to check on trust. Does this part trust you? Does this part feel like it can trust you? If the part does trust the client, take a moment. You want to kind of capture that response. Thank it for trusting you and notice this response. If not, it's usually helpful to let the part know that that's understandable. It doesn't make sense to you why this part may not trust anyone. So, it's not personal necessarily. And if it is, it is. And then you just address whatever is baked into that. But oftentimes it's not personal. And usually the clients can recognize, oh, yeah, absolutely. I totally appreciate why you wouldn't trust me. Simply validating that, ironically, creates trust. So you let it know you understand, notice how it responds. And then sometimes that does the trick. The client will just notice that the part's softening up, or there's maybe more of a self-led relationship to the protector. And so you can spend some time just, sending that. Yeah, it makes sense to me. And so you let it know that. How do you feel towards it now? Well, now I feel a lot of compassion toward this protector. Great. Send it your compassion. How does it respond? Okay, great. Is it maybe willing now to step back? Let's just pretend it says no. Then you go into the main intervention around trust, which is, what does this part need so it can trust you more? The parts almost always know. And again, if it's something that can be done immediately, do it. And it's almost always something that can be done immediately. And usually it is, for example, it wants me to slow down, listen to it, make sure we have enough time. Yeah, and so then let's just use these as an example. So right now, okay, so what does this part need so it can trust you more? Well, it wants us to take this really slow. Okay, let the part know that we're going to take it really slow. And right now, I want you to just, in whatever way feels right for you, to just practice slowing down and notice what happens to the part. Notice what happens to the trust between this part and you. And whatever the part asks for, you just have the client do it, and the trust usually increases. Okay, moving right along. Next section, unblending / befriending. Can you feel this protective part's care for you, or positive intent? All right, this is from neurosculpting. This can be a really powerful piece that it just doesn't. I've never heard anyone from IFS talk about this. And so these protector parts are protecting clients because they care about the client. And simply asking that, do you, and this isn't always available. Sometimes, no, I don't feel any care from this critic. It's just criticizing these parts and me, and it doesn't feel great. Which, by the way, is possibly where you would want to tease out potential burdens or introject energy. But let's just say that as you're working with the protector part, you maybe get a sense that this protector part actually cares. Do this, play around with this. Do this as a pit stop and just check it out. Can you feel this protector part's care for you? And the person who taught me this question, she said when she first did this, she could feel the protector part kind of almost hug her, and she could just feel an embrace, and it was so revolutionary for her to do a 180 around her relationship. Let's just say it was like a critic part, and just asking this, and the part was able to like full on just give her care, which is kind of ironic. Here you have, a protector part giving self energy to the client, which and that can absolutely happen. So then, if yes, take a moment, take that in, notice how the protector part responds, as you receive its care. And if you uncover something like this, more times than not, this protector part is good to go, and they're trusting you, they'll collaborate with you, they're part of the team, and you can move forward with what you need to. All right, so contracting, this you could ask at any point. You would maybe lead with this. Say you're identifying parts, and there's a lot of sadness, and everyone agrees, yeah, we should work with this grief, this sadness. You just throw it out there. Are there any parts that have concerns about giving the sadness your attention? And you, even if you've already worked with, let's say, 5, 6, 10 protector parts, it's if you're going to err on the safe side, you would ask this before going to the exile one more time. Are there any other parts that have concerns about giving the sadness attention, the sadness/exile attention? Wait, especially if you're new to this, wait until you get that we're good, there's no more concerns, no other parts of concerns, before you move forward with relating to the exile, ideally. And sometimes you just get there relatively quickly. You might work with a couple protector parts and then ask them, all right, well, how are you feeling towards the sadness now? Well, now I have a lot of compassion for it. That's good. That's what we want to get to. And even then, especially if you're new to this, just go ahead and check it out anyways. Okay, that's great. You're feeling compassion towards the sadness, and just check it out. Are there any other parts that have concerns about being with the sadness? Usually you're fine, but it's good just to check just in case. Okay, so moving right along, contracting. So I named this earlier. It's just such a great way to address any time there's a concern or a fear. What is this part's concern? And then you address the concern. It's almost always something that can be addressed immediately. What's a concern around, trying to think of an example, but I'm spacing it, so we'll just keep going. I've already talked about that one. All right, contracting with managers. I think we touched on this a little bit. Okay, so here we're going to go managers, firefighters, and further down, it should be exiles, but we'll see. We'll see where that is. All right, so top manager concerns. This is review. That the exile's feelings would be too much, and or the exile's feelings will never change. So here's some wording for all this. Would this protector part be willing to let you give the other part attention if the exile agrees to slow down just as much as you can handle, agrees to show you just as much as you can handle? And or if, this is for the exile. Okay, so top manager concerns are that one, exile's feelings will be too much, and or the exile's feelings will never change. Okay, so for the not changing, if there was a way to help this part feel better, would you be open to stepping back so we could try? So another way to address that feelings never change. And or can this protector part reflect on how these feelings are not always present and that feelings tend to change often? So that's, kind of addressing a young logic moment where, people go to always, never, and that's young logic. I call that kind of stuff young logic. Easily reevaluated. All right, now we talked about firefighters. The firefighter parts that don't trust the managers. They come out, they take over, they hijack when they don't trust that the managers are doing their job, can do their job. So first, if you know those are around, and you could assess this just from client history, if they have any kind of addiction history, active addictions, then you know there's firefighters in this person's system. So always first make sure that managers are okay with talking with the firefighters. So do any parts have concerns if we address the part that wants to drink, restrict, dissociate, distract? And firefighter parts are also ones that will have suicidal tendencies and impulses. So one of the really powerful aspects of IFS is that it gives you a very empowering way to address that head on. There's no reason to be afraid of any part. And you want to, just treat them with respect. If that's where a part is, it just is where they are. They're feeling suicidal. You just get curious, find out more about that, and trust that something can be negotiated. They'll much more appreciate if you're willing to meet them right where they're at, and not try to manage them yourselves. And this gives you a pathway to do exactly that. If there are concerns, address the manager concerns. What do these parts need to feel comfortable allowing you to talk to this other firefighter part? And it's things you can address immediately. It could be, again, I'm making this up. I don't think I've ever heard anything like this, but we're concerned. I'll use one I have heard. We're concerned about binging and purging. We don't want to do that anymore. So then you check in with the firefighter. If we give you some time and attention, can you agree not to take over, not to do those behaviors, but we want to see how we can help you? Something as simple as that can be enough to just create enough of an agreement for the manager to relax and to let you find out how far back does the binging and purging go? How young is this part? What was going on? And essentially now you're doing witnessing. This was Peter's question a few videos ago, around going into basically exile type of work with any protector part. If that ever presents itself and seems even slightly needed, go for it. You are healing. You're helping heal the client's system. And it's great. You don't have to have kind of a laser focused on the exiles. All roads lead to Rome. Anywhere you can establish a self to part relationship is having a healing effect on the system. So if managers have no concerns, essentially to the firefighter, would you be willing to allow us to work with the part you're trying to push away? Usually pain, shame-based, so that we can see if we can help it feel better. So the part that the firefighter is protecting would be the exile, would be the part that experienced the trauma, or the part that's feeling the pain, shame, some form of dysregulation. And the firefighter, yes, is trying to make those feelings go away. But yes, that part is just trying to make it go away. So you're asking, can we, if we could help it feel better, which we touched on earlier. So this is now directed towards the firefighter. All right, so address all the firefighter concerns and get its agreement before focusing on the exile. Always then checking, how are you feeling towards the exile part now? To see, are we now in a self to part relationship? I'm just monitoring the time. I think we can get a few more of these in here. All right, so next piece, self to part relationship. So we've touched on this, but here it is officially. For any self-led quality that is experienced towards a part, send it your curiosity, send it your care, send it your understanding, and notice how it responds. The reason I have this question finally, we've talked about it quite a bit, but the reason I have it here in the table is because this is when you're most likely to have this start to arise. After you've addressed the managers, the firefighters, you've unblended them significantly, you've befriended them, you've honored them, you've addressed their concerns, And this is what Dick saw when he first created IFS. Just putting these different protector parts on chairs, self showed up spontaneously. Inherently, it was there. And it just needed to be uncovered in a sense. So anytime that comes up, it's a good opportunity to just go ahead and send the self-led quality, send the compassion, notice how the part responds. Capturing impact, we've talked about that quite a bit. So how does a part respond? I feel like that's really important to take advantage of. We've already talked about that quite a bit. And if you want, just to give it more runway and let it be, give it a chance to like, you might have clients where they're getting things a little bit more slowly. So you can simply say, just let me know when you notice a response. So send the part your care and just let me know when you notice a response. Okay. I'm curious if we want to go into this today or if we'll just park it here. Let's do the next one. So who does this part protect? This is a more general question. It's identifying parts. So if it's not super clear, and sometimes doing naming this explicitly, like you're dealing with whatever protector and you're, just really kind of feels like you're wrestling with it a little bit. Simply asking this and saying, okay, Mr. Critic, you're working so hard, you got a lot of energy, just curious, what part are you maybe protecting? And then once the protector shows who they're protecting, it's a lot easier to have compassion really for that whole subsystem, and compassion for the protector, like seeing that it's not just trying to cause trouble, but it's actually protecting a more vulnerable part. And if simply the exiles aren't very clear, this is a fantastic question to ask. And you can ask it at any point when you're working with any protector part. They're always protecting something. A manager is either protecting a part in a sense. It may not seem that way explicitly, but it's implied, and functionally that's what's happening. And or the firefighters are trying to push a part away. And so I don't think this is in the table, but a question along those lines is with the firefighter, what parts are you trying to push away? You could always ask something like that. 3 more minutes. Let's go through these. You know what? We're at a bunch of F questions. We'll pause here, and maybe by next time I'll have the 5 Fs piece highlighted. Wow. What a great idea. Gonna highlight it. Underline. I think it's already bolded. I will underline it. All right, fantastic. So let's go ahead and pause there. For those of you who are here, if there's any questions, now's your chance. If not, we'll see you again next week, 9 o'clock. We'll be fully prepared and ready to go. And hopefully we'll just kind of flush out the 5 Fs and just get that piece done. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for showing up, and we'll see you next time.